to hit the record button for here as well. Holy shnikey, we've got 15 people now. Let's go ahead and get everybody in here. All right, let's see now. Okay, now I'm getting nervous because this is my biggest event so far. All right, let's make sure everybody is. All righty, and let me make sure this is going here. All right, welcome everybody to a Free Thinkers Corner, Books and More live event, virtual book launch with Gina Troisi, right? Is that how it's pronounced?
Yep.
Just a quick housekeeping thing real quick is I would like everybody to please keep your videos off and your mics muted. That's going to keep down people from accidentally popping in and out and keep down some of the confusion. If you do have a question, if you're here live with us on Zoom, please use the chat. And I need to bring that up. There we go. Use the chat and I'll relay your question or comment to Gina. If you're on Facebook Live, same thing. Just throw it in the comment section there and I will relay it to her as well. Let me do a couple more here. And so without further ado, Gina Troisi, she received an MFA in creative nonfiction at the University of Maine in 2009. Her works have appeared in numerous literary journals and anthologies. We're going to talk about those. Her stories and essays have been finalists in several contests, and she was a writer in residence in 2012 at the Randolph College in Lynchburg, Virginia. She also teaches writing at SNHU, creative writing classes in Dover, and does private tutoring for writing. And now she has her very first published memoir. Gina, thank you for joining us. And
thank you so much, Chris. Thank you. Thank you for having me. And thanks everyone for coming.
So just a quick little thing about a couple of reviews I read about your book, or I should say not reviews, but praise. Let me start by saying I have read it. And of course, I praise it as well. It was very good. I would definitely be talking about this. But we have from Dominica Ruda, a New York Times bestselling author. She says, the psychological abuse Troisi endured as a child had my fist clenching in rage. It's almost a relief when she at last finds escape in drugs, in codependent love, on the open road. But this is a story of powerful recovery in the truest sense of the word, the journey of a woman who reclaims a sense of home and the sanctity of the self. Another review here, Sue William Silverman, another author. There's an element of the mythic in Gina Troisi's memoir, the evil stepmother, the father who misplaced family loyalties, the daughter whose light eventually shines. Except here, the tale, as with much of real life, is riddled with addiction, both substance and sexual. And the heroine is far more likely to wear broken sandals than crystal slippers. Unlike Cinderella, Troisi's journey to royalty, red sanity, and acceptance isn't magical. It's slow and hard won. The story isn't less miraculous for that, but more so. Wow. And like I said, I read it too. I found it fascinating. I found it angering. I found it the whole gamut of emotions. And I'm very happy to see that you came out in the end the way you are and what you've done. So let's talk about it. Actually, why don't we go ahead and start with, you wanted to do a little reading of the book. Yeah, why don't we go ahead and start? We got this great review of everything that's there. Let's go ahead and start with that.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Chris. I think I will just read. So this is the book, The Angle of Flickering Light, as Chris said. I think I will just read a portion of the first chapter to get started. And the first chapter is called Left Behind. At 5 years old, I sat Indian style on the foot of my father's bed, alone in his new condo. I'd gathered his ballpoint pens from the desk in the corner and began assessing the pictures of women adorning the pens. They wore spiked high heels and bright colored leotards and bikinis and blue sequined triangular tops that reminded me of my older sister's dance recital costumes. Their miniature figures pronounced behind sparkles and strings, their bodies splayed into decorative shapes. I tipped them upside down and their sparse garments fell off. They were proportioned women with hardened pink nipples and clumps of dark hair between their legs. I clothed and unclothed them with the flick of my wrist, turned them upside down, then right side up again. They were grown up, like my mother, whom my father had just left. I was mesmerized by these ladies, by their full, buoyant breasts, by the inner curves of thighs that made a hollowed out space for their private parts to breathe. I lay down, watching their clothes fall piece by piece, nestling myself into the cushion of the king-sized bed. The ladies made me think not only of my mother, but also of the faceless women my father rambled on about while out to eat at our favorite Italian restaurant. My sisters and I sat silent, letting him reiterate that Brenda, his secretary, who'd quickly become his girlfriend, had nothing to do with my parents' impending divorce, that he'd been cheating on my mother for years with all kinds of women, including prostitutes. Your mother just didn't want to admit it. She kept her head in the sand. Remember her friend Marla? Marla had lived with us for a while when she needed a place to stay in between moves. I slept with her too. We had an affair for 2 years while your mother and I were together. Ask her. When we arrived home from dinner crying, we gathered in my oldest sister's room. My mother came in to find us sitting on the bed. What happened? She asked. Krista was 12, so she did most of the talking. He said he's been cheating on you for years, that you knew, that every time he went on a business trip, it was never for business. While my mother listened, I kneeled behind Krista and began to pop the cysts on her back. I worked around the straps of her tank top, performing a job I always volunteered for, since she couldn't reach. My sisters talked fast, repeated my father's words, the gestures he'd made, how he acted as if we must have known about his mistresses all along. I concentrated on squeezing, on trying to find the pointed heads on the bumps of her skin. Harder, she usually said, until all the pus comes out, until they start bleeding. But today, she didn't tell me what to do, just waited for my mother's response. I can't believe he told you those things, my mother said. She looked at the orange walls, the baskets of necklaces made of white seashells and gold nuggets, stacks of teen magazine and Prince's first albums on cassette tapes. She stood there with a blank look in her eyes, the face of someone who no longer recognized her house or her daughter's bedroom. I waited for the yellowish cream, held a tissue to catch a glob when it emerged. Then the speck of blood. I chimed in. He said he's been having affairs since the 70s. My mother seemed shocked, and her lip quivered, as if she didn't know what else to say. She made no indication that my father's statements weren't true. She only said, he never should have told you any of that. I liked that I was good at this job, maneuvering these small red mounds, judging when to squeeze harder and when to ease up. I had no worries about scars, since no one would be able to see them, and I felt a kind of satisfaction when the sticky fluid appeared, like the purging of something, but I didn't know what. I thought of when my father lived here with us, in this brown house on a cul-de-sac, where I built snow igloos and plucked frogs from ponds with the neighborhood kids. His blaring records in the living room, John Denver's You Fill Up My Senses, and Cat Stevens' Morning Has Broken. His teaching me how to scramble cheese and black pepper into eggs. His arriving home from a trip to Japan with red, blue, and yellow kimonos for my sisters and me. His taking us to pick out a Christmas tree each year. These memories had suddenly become tweaked and clouded, sideswiped by the thoughts of women he was with on the Japanese vacation with his buddy, who was also cheating on his wife. And a few months back, when he and my sister came home from picking out the Christmas tree, and she, not understanding that it was a secret, said, Brenda got the good one, my mom's head jerking toward him, her face hot with anger. Already, I had grown used to my father's absence. My mother still drove me to kindergarten, the Little Friends Learning Center, in the mornings. When she picked me up in the afternoon, she still wore her jogging clothes, and we still sang along to Lionel Richie's All Night Long and Laura Branigan's Gloria on our way to pick up my sisters from dance lessons. The only time I had counted on seeing my father was before he left for work in the mornings. After he brushed his teeth with baking soda and shaved his face, stuck a piece of tissue on the spot on his chin where he constantly cut himself, he tied his tie and grabbed his briefcase, I'd stand in the living room crying and say, "Please don't leave me," over and over. He'd throw me up to the skylight and catch me, then give me a kiss and walk out the door. In the condo, I lathered my 5-year-old legs with Nair hair removal cream and glided my sister's razor up the front of my shins. I knew what women were supposed to look like. I was used to seeing naked ladies, their shapes embellished in the molds of ice cube trays my father kept in the freezer, their silhouettes knitted into his black winter hat to make their own white space, their blank faces and prominent breasts hugging his head. During the year my father lived at the condo, we arrived to find notes trailing from the front door and into the living room, through the hallway and up the stairs to the bedroom, finally reaching his bed. I sounded out the repetitious lines, "For my lover" and "From your lover," that began and ended each vignette, individual notes taped neatly around pieces of uneaten chocolate. We picked them up, but didn't unfold the paper to see the messages inside, and he laughed as we gathered them together, piling them on the desk in his bedroom. We knew then that we would be moved out as Brenda moved in, our roles in his life diminishing, our important jobs of holding wallet, money clip, and keys in our small purses obsolete. She'd be the one going for 4-wheel drives in the woods with him, taking trips to the dump with garbage bags covering the windshield while he stuck his head outside the driver's side window to see the road. She'd go sailing with him, and when the boat tipped over, she wouldn't be the one caught underneath the sail, gasping for air, terrified that no one would find her to pull her up. We, who had not yet grown into women, would be left behind. Not long after that day in my sister's bedroom, I accompanied my mother on a shopping trip to Loehmann's, her favorite department store. I trailed behind her between racks of clothes, touched the ceramic hands of poised mannequins, and followed her into a dressing room lined with mirrors, into a separate stall big enough for the both of us. Now that my father had moved out, she was shopping for clothes to wear to interviews for a job she would hopefully find. She was preparing to return to work after having stayed home for several years. I sat on the bench in the dressing room, my short legs dangling over the platform, while she slipped a blouse over her head, adjusted her shoulder pads, and nodded at her green eyes in the mirror. I smiled at the shade of blue silk, awaited the ice cream she promised to get me after a day of being good, of letting her take her time. My mother's eyes seemed lit up as she checked herself out in the mirror, turning to her left and right, slipping her stockings off and sliding her slender feet into red flats. I realize now her wide eyes were most likely a sign of high alert, anticipation of the upheaval to come. But that day, my world consisted only of my mother's bright eyes and the mint chocolate chip ice cream I would eat in a few hours. On some level, I must have known that my father was probably off with his mistress, or possibly late to pick up my sister who sat at dancing school alone, all of the other kids gone, wondering if he'd ever show. But this was beyond my peripheral vision. Within my lens, in this radiant dressing room with my mother's smooth skin and potential new outfit, everything still seemed possible. I think I'll stop there.
That was wonderful. Let's see. So we got our first question or comment, Rick. Gina, I noticed the several descriptions of people's hands and how their size, shapes, etc., seem to speak to the characters, to speak to the character of the person. Were you consciously aware of this at the time, or did you recall the detail about people in your life come to you during the writing process?
Yeah, that's definitely, thanks, Rick, for the question. That's definitely something that I noticed way later after I'd kind of put the book together, that there was kind of these recurring images of people's hands throughout. So no, I did not consciously do that. And there's really very little I'm consciously doing up front, but later on in revision, I'm noticing these things and kind of thinking about what's connecting the dots throughout.
One of the questions, so one of the questions I have I'd like to start with is why write it the way you did? Well, first, three-part question, I guess.
Yeah.
Why a memoir versus fiction?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's kind of interesting because I started working on my MFA in 2007. And it's kind of funny how things happen, right? In writing and in life. I applied in fiction to focus in fiction, but I was really writing these autobiographical pieces and events from my life and writing about these life experiences. And I was basically just changing my own name. And so and I thought that was fine. I'll just imply in fiction and that's what I'll do. And a couple of the mentors at the program I went to, Stonecoast MFA in Portland, Maine, said, we think you're writing creative nonfiction. We think that should be your focus here, which, creative nonfiction, in other words, memoir. So I just said, yeah, you guys are the experts. If that's what I'm writing, I'll go for that. And so it kind of happened organically. And I wrote a lot of standalone essays in the beginning that were based on life experiences that I wasn't intentionally putting together as an actual book. So it happened in a pretty roundabout and frankly inefficient way to write a book, because I was thinking of all these disparate pieces. But I think in the end, it was really the right decision. I don't think if I'd written it as fiction, I would have been able to get my points across in the same way. I just think it would have been a completely different book. And I've heard some writers say, they've written a memoir and then they've written a whole book-length work of fiction about the same exact subject matter. And it's so interesting to see those differences.
So when you mentioned essays, that's the kind of feel, without giving spoilers, that's the kind of feel I got from the book, whereas each chapter was different essays. There was a linear aspect to it, but there was a lot of back and forth, kind of time jumping forward and backward within each chapter.
Yeah.
In the book, you had mentioned that a lot of it came from, or you kept a journal throughout. So did you take well, why did you choose it to do it that way, as sort of individual chapters, as essays or short, and then back and forth instead of just a linear thing?
Yeah, I think because of what I was just talking about, how I started with the different standalone essays. And I was even, I was writing these standalone essays, I was publishing these standalone essays. And then it got to a point where my mentors and peers were kind of like, this is a book, you have recurring themes, you have recurring characters, you have recurring subject matters. This is a book length work. So when I started really looking at it finally as a book length work, it was, so I guess what I'm saying is I kind of did it in reverse, So I looked at this collection of essays I had and thought, how can I put these together as a compilation? So it was really tricky and challenging to find the structure, and it took a long time because, as you said, it covers a wide span of time. From like age 5 to maybe age 35, it jumps around. So I had to think really deeply about how can I make this a cohesive book where I do kind of have the liberty to not necessarily write from beginning to end. So I don't know if it was so much of a conscious choice or just a solution to how to structure the book. If
Um,
that
so did this start before you got your MFA or after your MFA?
It started probably like right at the beginning of my MFA. So I started my MFA in 2007, and really that's when most of this work was originating in this book. Of course, it's in a very different form now, but that's when this work was really beginning to be generated, was way back in 2007. So yeah, and then I finished in 2009, and I would say I probably have most of the content of the book. And then I kind of filled in the gaps here and there.
So a lot of it is from memory. How I don't want to say how accurate was your memory, but obviously the things that are a lot of traumatizing things have happened in your life, which could say very vivid in your mind. So again, I'm not trying to say that. You know what I'm trying to say?
No, I do. I think you're talking about the fallibility of memory, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. And it's one that comes up so often in memoir, and it absolutely needs to be addressed. And it's so tough. And that's something that I do, and not to give a spoiler, but like there is a portion of the memoir where I kind of contemplate the reliability of memory for those exact reasons, right? Because I think we all have these situations where, we might be talking to a sibling or a parent that was at an event that we were also at a number of years ago, and we remember it completely differently, right? We remember these events completely differently than other people who were also there. So that's just a testament to how different all of our memories are. And I think it's a great question. And I do have like this little disclaimer at the beginning of the book for that exact reason, that talks about, this really is written from my perspective alone, right? One of my sisters might write a memoir. Well, I'm going to say this because I got this from Andre Dubus 3. I heard him talking about his memoir, Townie, but he raised such a good point. He said that, he had has 4 or 5 siblings, and he writes this memoir, Townie, about his time growing up. And he said, my sister or brother could write their own memoir, and it could be totally different, even though it's about those same years we're growing up in the same house. And I thought that was just such a good point. So I think it's so important to trust your memory, but it is tough. And especially if you're writing about traumatic events, because if you get in, God forbid, a fender bender or something like that, and someone asks you what happened, you're remembering it to the best of your ability, but there is like a level of shock, and you're like, oh, am I remembering it accurately? This is how I recall it, but what if I'm wrong? So I think that wondering should be part of the process, and you do the absolute best you can. And then when it comes to conversations, that's also tough, right? How can I remember, like from what I just read, a conversation when I'm 5 years old so detailed? Will you do it to the best of your ability and say, this is what I am 99.9% sure was said? And you do have to sometimes kind of fill in the blanks of what someone would have said to the best of your ability.
What were the biggest influences, isn't the word, but influences on writing this? Was it you had a very good relationship with your grandfather, and he was very prominent in the majority of the book, but then you had this, especially at 5 years old, in my mind, weird relationship with your father, with all these women that he brought home and all the sexuality that went on. And then you had all the relationships with was it John and Corey, I believe. And that's a big part of the books as well, your mother. So you have all these influences. Was there were any of them more prominent in the influence of you writing this?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't think one was more prominent than the other. I mean, I think in the end, it's my story, and these are like prominent characters throughout. My grandfather, yeah, he's definitely really big in the book, and he was a really important person to me. And I think, there's this whole middle part of the book that deals with this like really difficult couple of years that was a huge turning point in my life. And it also happened to be when he died. So I do think that was a huge influence. But I don't think that like any one of them was the influence for writing it so much more than another. But it kind of goes back to what we were saying before, right? Where I'm writing all these disparate pieces from my life, and there's these overlaps and these recurring themes and characters coming together because it is one life, you know?
Yeah, definitely each part has a different main theme, but there were recurring things um, throughout each chapter. So when you started writing this as just sort of a project, was it more of a cathartic thing for you? But then after a while, it sort of morphed into more of, well, um, your mentors and stuff are saying, this is really, we should go in this direction with it.
Yeah, I don't even think it was really cathartic at that point when I actually started crafting it into like, self-contained essays. I think it was probably cathartic, like, when I was a kid writing in journals and diaries for a number of years and crafting stories and poems from like, you know, my childhood up through my adolescence. That's probably when it was cathartic, when it wasn't even anything that had a shape yet. So I think by the time I actually started to craft it into different pieces, I had to really be removed and detached from it enough to do that. So I think I had to be past like catharsis in a sense, I heard Joyce Maynard, the memoir writer, say, and I think of this all the time, and I tell my students this, that in order to write about an experience, we have to quote unquote, let the ashes cool. So I think by the time I was actually writing this book, I mean, the ashes were pretty cooled. I had enough distance to really think about myself as like a character in the book rather than me.
Right, right. Melanie Brooks asked, can you talk about what it was like for you to make that transition from autobiographical fiction in which you could sort of claim anonymity to writing fully and openly about your own experiences?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Melanie. I actually have Melanie's book right here, Writing Hard
Ah,
Stories, which is a wonderful book about writing memoir and was a huge help to me. So yeah, I think that, I mean, there is this kind of vulnerability, right? Where you're saying, okay, it's nonfiction when you're transitioning from calling something fiction to calling it nonfiction. But at the same time, a lot of my friends that publish books of fiction say, yeah, but it's the same thing in fiction where everybody's like, is that me that you're talking about and you're writing about? So I don't know if I really felt the transition fully because I don't think I was really thinking it through. I was kind of just like listening to the experts who were saying, you're writing memoir, you're not writing fiction. And I was like, okay. So I think I was so early on in becoming a writer that I didn't really fully feel that till I was actually bringing it out in the world. And then I said, what the hell did I do? Why didn't I write this as fiction?
now you talk about vulnerability. Did you, when you were writing it and you were thinking that, okay, I'm writing this, I'm going to be publishing this, people are going to see this, did you ever feel like you needed to you wanted to hold back on stuff, but then had to remind yourself or think that, no, this is a memoir. This needs to, I want to tell this part of the story. And then, is there things that you did decide to hold back? You don't have to give us examples, but
Yeah, I think yes to both. I mean, I think you absolutely have to go through and say, oh my God, I don't want to put this out. I think I did go through and say, I don't want to put this out there. And then if it's serving the larger purpose of the narrative, and if you're really looking at the narrative and what needs to be there in order to shape it, and you're thinking about what to keep in and what to leave out, I think you have to honor that. And I mean, I know a lot of different memoir writers experience this in different ways. Some say they pretend they're writing to like this one really lovely person or friend, like no one's ever going to read it. And I think you have to approach that approach it that way sometimes. Like, you're alone in a room crafting this thing, and if you think about everyone who's going to read it, I think it's so easy to be censoring yourself when maybe that's not serving the larger purpose of the story. And then there's definitely stuff, sure, that I chose to leave out, either like to protect privacy or for all kinds of reasons. I changed, most names and places, identifying factors, types of cars, different things like that. Sure, because I really, when I was editing, combed through and said, okay, this is the final, and am I being completely fair? And am I violating anyone's privacy? Am I honoring this work to the best of my ability and being ethical?
Well, that's what I was going to ask then. So John and Corey, and those are not pseudonyms,
Not real names. Yeah.
right, not real names.
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
no. Yeah.
So were you ever worried about what the negative, any negativity from this, from people who would call you, a druggie, someone who wants attention, those type of trolls?
Yeah, sure. Oh, yeah. I mean, I've lost a lot of sleep about it, probably. But I think in the end, and one thing I learned from Melanie's writing hard stories that I just mentioned, is that I think in the end, it's really empowering to kind of not give into that and to say, I'm respecting everyone to the best of my ability. I'm not doing anything that would be vindictive, or vengeful. I'm really trying to dig into my own story and tell my own truth to the best of my ability. And a lot of memoir writers, I think, go through that and the doubt, and you want like everyone's approval, like it's okay, I'm in the book, and all of that. And I think it's really so individual, where you have to think about what you're okay with putting out into the world. Yes, people might judge you, but that's kind of how life is too, So I think it's almost a good life lesson. And in a sense, it's kind of empowering to just say, well, it's honest. And I think the world would be a better place if we had a little bit more honesty. So as much as I can be, have the self-doubt and the worry, I have to kind of look at like the bright side, and that maybe the book helps other people feel less alone and gives other people hope who have been in like darker situations,
Yeah. So I'm sure you got emotional while you were writing this, but did you ever get so just the memory of it while you're writing it, you get to a point where you have to say, okay, yeah, I have to put this aside for a little while and to collect yourself, or just kind of take a break, or?
Yeah, I think by the time I was really writing this, I had already had a lot of therapy and self-work. So I don't know that I got so emotional while writing it. It was more like it slipped into my subconscious a lot more, like I'm working on the book and I'm dreaming about things from 20 years ago and things like that, more so than like on a conscious level making me upset. And I think that kind of goes back to the let the ashes cool thing. I think that you have to kind of get to this point where you can feel detached enough that it is really a work of art that you're crafting. Like, it's not really even you. And I don't even look at it like it's me. It's like another version. We have all these different versions of ourselves, right? When we're 5, it's very different than when we're 15, than when we're 25, than when we're 40. So it feels I feel kind of removed from it in that sense.
So Carol asks, Carol Dupree, my apologies. Says, congratulations. It's a very compelling book. Did your family read this before you published it? And what were some of their reactions if they did?
My mom and my sisters, well, this is kind of one of the benefit too of having published a lot of the pieces that eventually became the chapters in the book as standalone essays, is it's kind of like people had time to see them gradually over a period of years. And at that point, they're in literary journals and stuff, so they're probably not as widely seen as when it's in book form. So my sisters have read most of it for sure, and my mom and stepfather, yes. And my mom was really, really supportive about it. And yeah, so I mean, there are people in the book that are no longer in my life. So did I mail them a copy of the book and say, you know, can you read it before I publish it? No, you know. So yeah. So the people in my life read it before it went out.
How hard was it to let go of those people?
Um, I mean, I don't know. That's kind of something I think that had happened naturally. So I think that it's just kind of like any relationships that kind of evolve throughout time and in your life, right? Relationships
Right.
come into your life and leave. So it's
Because
kind of
there's really four main that I remember, four main people in your book, in your life. I mean, your grandfather, which he passed away.
yeah.
So that's self-explanatory. But you've got John, you've got Corey, you had really deep relationships with the two of them, between um, the physical relationships, and then there was also the substance abuse relationships with them, and then there was your father, who there was definitely, I could feel, a strained relationship, and just for me, a weird thing when you were 5 years old and he has all these naked women, and just the way he acted around you. And actually, let's say one more, Brenda.
Mm.
um, uh, the thing with bringing you to that house, I didn't understand. So, if you want to say, that's fine, but you don't have to say which ones of those do you stay in touch with. Are those the ones that was it easy or hard to get them out of your, or let them go from your life?
Um, Probably pretty easy in a lot of ways. I mean, easy and hard, right? Because
Yeah.
anybody you care about, it's not like always easy to get them to separate from them in your life. But I do think some relationships have to end, and it's for the better. Um, yeah, so I think some of those, that's four people. So some of them happen more organically than others. Um, yeah, so yeah, I don't know what else to say about that.
um um so you also teach, or you taught classes and workshop in both traditional and non-traditional settings, including writing workshops for adult survivors of sexual assault. Did this book, or did your experiences have something to do with that path?
No, actually, I just, I started volunteering for sexual assault support services some years ago, which is now called Haven. It's right in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, but it was called Sexual Assault Support Services, aka SAS. And I started volunteering there. I think at the time, I really just wanted to give back and do some volunteer work. And I was bartending full time. It was before I went back to my MFA. And so I had a little bit of time to do that. And I started working on the crisis hotlines for sexual survivors. And so, I'd get paged, I'd do like these overnight shifts where I'd get paged when women were in crisis, and I'd call them back and talk to them, or sometimes meet them at the hospital and be an advocate, for victims. And I really, really, really enjoyed that work. I loved all the people I worked with there. So then when I was working on my MFA, I had to do a third semester project, and you could either write a critical essay, it could be something having to do with your writing, something about character. whatever you wanted to do. And I really wanted to focus on leading a writing workshop with these women, with these adult survivors of sexual assault. And I loved it. I loved doing it. And I focused a lot. I researched a lot about poetry therapy, which is, similar to art therapy and music therapy, but with poetry. And I really enjoyed that research. And so I applied a lot of what I learned in these workshops with these women. And I really loved it.
One of the things when I was reading the book was especially the beginning where you were so young, is one of my first thoughts was, this girl's going to need a lot of therapy when she grows up.
I've had a lot. I'm okay. Yeah.
Yeah, you seem okay. That's good. I'd like to talk about your grandfather. Your grandfather was such a big part of the book, which tells me he was a big part of your life, and he was just seemed to be such a positive character in your life. Tell us a little bit about him.
Yeah, he was a really positive character. I mean, I think for me, my father wasn't a great male role model, and ironically, he was my father's father. But he was this like really prominent, positive presence, and just really encouraging and accepting of everything my sisters and I did. Not everything, but and he really appreciated who we were as people. And it was just like a really healthy relationship. But I was close to both my grandparents starting from a young age, which is kind of detailed in the first chapter, the part that I didn't get to yet. And while I was reading. And so that's kind of meant to set up the relationship for the grandfather later on. But the other reason he's so prominent in the book is, even though, he was 82 when he died, he was older, it was really, really sudden when he died. And so it was this really crazy time in my life. And so for him to be dying all of a sudden during these really difficult times in my life was like, it was just like a pivotal moment.
Also, going to ask, was that a catalyst to a lot of the things that happened afterwards with the drug abuse and the I don't know if it was promiscuity, but definitely the relationships that you had.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it helped. I think I think it put me in a more difficult place, and I felt really lost after he died. Sure,
I was gonna
absolutely.
say, was he more of your? He was your stability. He was kind of your rock.
Yeah, him and my mother. But
Yep.
yeah, like as far as the male, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you about your mother next. So, but before that, though, so you did in your book, you did a drive from New Hampshire all the way down to Florida, I believe it was, where he was living to see him. But then he ended up coming back to New Hampshire by the time you got down there, and you had to turn around and this is all he kept his illness a secret.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's part of why it was so intense and such a climactic time is I was moving from New Hampshire to Florida, and he lived in Florida, and I was taking this time that I thought was going to be, amazing to like stop and see him for 3 weeks on my way to a different part of Florida where I was going to be living. And so I had like my whole car packed and I was ready to leave like the next day. And we thought he had like a gallbladder issue. He had some little health scare, it seemed. And my sister called and said, no, he's dying. He has like days to live. So I did leave to drive down. And then she called when I was on the way in like North Carolina. And I literally had to turn around. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was terrible. Yeah.
So Rick asks, it says, Gina, seems to me that your writing, which is compelling throughout, turned more lyrical toward the end. Were you consciously aware of this when you were writing the book? Maybe my perception is just off.
No, I don't think your perception's off at all, Rick. I think that was also a result of putting it together with the essays. I mean, I think the book's divided into 3 parts. So the third part really focuses more on the adult narrative voice, like more the me that's closest to the version of me now, so kind of hopefully a wiser adult voice and narrative voice. So I think that's why it might be more lyrical, is it's more reflecting on what happened in the first two parts of the book, you know, from this adult narrative perspective that's hopefully wiser and has gained some insight from her experiences.
How did you arrange? How did you set the arrangement? Did you have all your essays kind of laid out and then just kind of shuffle them back and forth, computer program, however you did it?
Yeah.
Um, how did you decide how to organize it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I actually did like sit on the floor and spread them all over carpets and different places where I've lived because this has been a long process. So originally I put the book together as a compilation of standalone essays. So there wasn't the narrative through line that you see now. It wasn't written as much like a memoir. So, you know, I was sending it out back in like 2012 as an essay collection, as a standalone essay collection with the pieces much more disparate than the chapters are now. And I had interest from an editor of a small press, and he really wanted me to create more of a narrative through line in the book and have more chapters than standalone essays. And so I actually spent some weeks restructuring the whole book. I mean, I took like at least a few weeks off of work and was like, I'm just going to sit down and restructure this whole book. So at that point, I used a binder and literally physically cut the essays up, you know, so I could have like these typed, I mean, there were typed pages I had printed out, and then I could literally cut them up, and maybe there's a scene that's this much of a page that's in the binder. Do you see what I'm saying?
Mhm.
To kind of decide on the sequence of events. So that's kind of why I said at the beginning, my process was a little inefficient. I don't know if I highly recommend it.
It's amazing doing these. You know, I've done dozens of these interviews, and everybody has such different. I never realized how many different ways there were of putting together, writing together, arranging a book. Um, what was I going to ask? That's I think is kind of what made it a little confusing for me at the beginning was the way it was arranged, not realizing until a little ways into it that this is the way it was supposed to be. Because I'm expecting some sort of linear thing, and then as I'm going, I'm like, okay, wait a minute, she's back to being a kid again, but now she's in San Francisco, or now she's on her way down. What happened here? And then I'm like, okay, I get it. So that was a little confusing at the beginning, but
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry to hear
that's okay.
that.
But once so I guess it's kind of a spoiler. Once you sort of figure out the way that it was written, it's sort of more poetic in a sense.
Yeah.
So your mother, you mentioned your grandfather was the male influence, a positive influence in your life. Your mother was the female positive role model. Talk about your mother.
Yeah, my mom, she's here now. No, we're really, really close. We have a great relationship. So she's kind of my number one fan. Yeah, she's been really supportive of this whole process the whole time.
Good, good.
Yeah.
So and the other two main characters, um, people in your book is of course John and Corey. How do you want to talk about how you got involved with them? Or and I think it was John ended up going to rehab somewhere in New Hampshire, and I don't remember how things ended up with Corey, but um,
Yeah, I mean, Corey and I grew up together. So there's like this whole history of we were buddies and we were friends our whole lives, you know, and he ends up getting into trouble. It's so interesting too, like how the times have changed when you think about this, right? Because he did go to prison for 2 years, but it was for marijuana, you know, which is now like legal in so many places. Like it was for selling and it was for a large amount. So I'm not trying to minimize it, but I don't think you'd see that same type of sentence now 20 years later that you saw then, you know. So he's kind of, you know, yeah, he ends up in this kind of really, really tough situation. And we are close friends who grew up together, and we are writing letters to each other because I'm a writer and I wrote letters to everyone my whole life, really. I had so many pen pals. And so this kind of relationship develops, but we also know each other in this really like intimate way from being growing up together, you know? And then yeah, John and I worked in the restaurant business for a lot of years. So that was kind of a relationship that developed from the restaurant business. And again, it was during that like really crucial time in my life when my grandfather's suddenly dying, and I'm in just like this really confused, lost state, you know, probably one of the hardest times in my life. So I wasn't making the best choices.
So where you said you were writing letters, is that kind of what got you into writing? Just being a writer was just a sort of a natural thing for you to go into?
Yeah, I mean, so I wanted to be a writer. The first time I remember wanting to be a writer was in third grade. I learned, actually, my third grade teacher is acknowledged at the end of the book because she taught me the writing process. And that was like, I just remember, you know, loving having this creative outlet to make all these things up and write all these stories. And I don't know, I just really fell in love with it. So, I mean, that was obviously elementary school and kind of continued. And then I always, always, always had like a journal with me. I mean, really up through my whole adolescence. I feel like I'd be like hanging out with friends at their houses and it'd be like Gina scribbling in her journal again, you know? So I have just journals from my whole life that initially were probably helpful in the crafting of the memoir. Yeah.
Well, was that also helpful just in your daily life? Say unconsciously that by with again with all the substance abuse and physical relationships and your father and your grandfather dying and all that kind of stuff, just writing stuff as you grew.
Yeah.
Do you think that looking back, do you think that helped keep you?
Sane.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think it was totally my number one creative outlet always. And it still keeps me sane. Not that I'm in a dark place now, but just like it is like it's something I need, you know, to
Mhm.
feel fulfilled. And I love just losing myself in those moments of like creating something. There's like this timelessness when you're writing, right? Some
Mhm.
people meditate. It's kind of like my meditation where it's like, oh, 2 hours just went by and you're totally in the present moment, you know, hopefully, if it's going well.
Yeah, I went through my midlife crisis 16, 15, 16, so some odd years ago. And but I took up there was nobody I could talk to. So I took up writing poetry.
Oh,
Um
wow. Nice.
and very angry, very dark poetry, but I think it kept me grounded.
Yeah. Oh,
Plus meditation. I
absolutely.
took up meditation as well. So I think between those two things that helped keep me grounded. So definitely it's a way to stay sane.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and it's kind of goes back to the therapeutic writing workshops with the survivors of sexual assault. It's like, I mean, I absolutely believe that writing can like heal and save. I mean, that all art can,
Mhm,
you know?
mhm. So one of the I thought was, well, at first I was wondering where you came up with the title of the book. So the Angle of Flickering Light, and it actually presented itself right in the book. And is
Yeah.
that where it was? I'm not a romantic. Well, with my wife, of course, I am, but in general, I'm not a romantic. But I just thought it was a very sort of, even though it was a dark scene, it was still very romantic. And you had the candles. You were lying on the floor in this, almost as a squatter, I think, in an apartment, and with I don't remember which one, but anyways, but then there was these candles, and is that where you came up with the idea for the title, or?
I mean, partially, yes. You know, I had an essay titled The Angle of Flickering Light, published some years ago, maybe in like 2014. So yes, I liked the title. I do typically, with my standalone essays, I do typically find like a line or something or an image that I like that might kind of work as the title and bring it all together. So I played around with the title a lot, and I know the scene you're talking about, and the title's taken right from the book. And it's interesting because I debated using the title because of, I don't want it to be like so representative of only that moment. I wanted the title to kind of represent the whole book and to be more about like, well, not about like a particular relationship with someone outside of yourself, but more about the relationship within, you know, and kind of like finding these glimpses of light in darkness when you find yourself maybe on a dark path. So, and there are a lot of candles throughout the book. So yeah, there's a theme, and I really wanted it to be an image. So I guess there's a few reasons, but I do want the book to kind of represent a sense of, hopefully people take away hope, perseverance, kind of looking for some sort of light within yourself, you know?
I think that was the point where I got to where things finally clicked, and it was, you could see sort of the positivity come out, and the recovery sort of starting to come out, um, throughout the rest of the book. Rick is asking, can you imagine reading the book in a single sitting as a reader versus the author? Would you even want to?
Wait, I don't know if I quite understand.
Can you imagine reading the book in a single setting as a reader versus the author?
Oh, like if I was not the author and
Right,
I was,
right.
oh, that's so hard. That's a hard question, Rick. I think, I mean, it's so hard when you're the writer of something, right? To gain even enough distance to like be an editor of your own work and to see things. So I think it's really hard for me to envision that. And also, you know, this was kind of a long road to publication. So I have read this book so many times. I mean, a couple of my good friends here have read this book so many times and so many art incarnations and given me, you know, great sound advice and feedback. So I don't know if I can imagine it. Yeah.
You reached out to me, I think it was 6 months ago, if not almost a year ago, I think it was.
Maybe,
It was,
maybe September, August.
yeah, it was quite a while when you introduced yourself and you told me about the book. And I'm like, yeah, okay, we'll get back to you. And then finally, when we could find a good time for it, and we found your release date, and that's when, we went ahead. So yeah, it's been in the works for quite a while.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the actual writing and publishing of the book. So you mentioned that you had everything laid out and you kind of literally cutting and pasting things together. What made you decide to go with a traditional publisher versus um, independent publishing?
Um, you know, I was really tied to going to the traditional publishing route. It's just something I really always wanted to do. So, and I've had a really, really great experience, you know, with a small press. Um, I don't know, maybe if like some years had gone by and it still hadn't been published, maybe I would have considered self-publishing it. But I mean, also there's the economic factor where you're self-publishing, like you're paying for everything, you know? So that's a whole other animal. But so yeah, it was just never really the route I wanted to take. And I think also where a lot of the pieces that ended up in the book were published, I had faith that it was going to be picked up, even though it took a long time. I had faith that it would happen, you know?
How did you decide to go with Vine Press? And how difficult, if you know, how much more difficult is it to present a memoir, and especially a memoir like this, or on the darker side, versus fiction, if it was done in a fiction form?
Yeah, I mean, I think that might depend on the avenue you try to go. You know, I, in the beginning, sent to agents as well as small presses. And the agent route, you know, the feedback I got a lot from like mentors and all kinds of people in the field was like, you're writing a memoir as like somebody that no one knows, you know, you're not Madonna or some celebrity writing a memoir. So it's just going to be harder for an agent to pick it up. They're thinking like, how am I going to sell this thing, you know? And so I was sort of experimenting with the agent route and the small press route and kind of seeing what clicked. And then I just really loved the attention the small presses give you, even in the form of like rejection letters. You know, they might write you a long rejection letter about, you know, what worked for them, what didn't work for them. You might get a little feedback where you're submitting to agents. I mean, a lot of times you don't even hear back, you know, nothing against agents. I think they're just so busy, but it's really a different path, you know, in that sense.
How many publishers did you go through before they finally picked this one up?
How many did I submit to?
Hmm.
Oh gosh, I don't know, a lot. A lot, because I started sending the book out in a totally different form as an essay collection back in 2012, 2013. So I mean, like I almost at one point had like 3 different versions of this book. This is kind of the third. Like I had 2, and then I put the book away for about 5 years, from probably 2013 to 2018. And in 2018, I said, and I was working on other projects, but not memoir, you know, fiction, and totally different projects. And I just said, okay, I'm going to take the book back out and I'm going to revisit it and I'm going to see what I can do with it. And a good friend of mine who's here tonight, Anthony, we spent like these 8 frantic months. He was working on a novel, and I was revamping the memoir. And every month we exchanged like mass amounts of pages with one another. And that was kind of like my rework. And then I sent it back, started sending it back out. So I don't know how many, because it's been in so many different increments, you know?
Yeah. How did you choose who to send it to? Did you just have like a list off the internet and just kind of send it out to everybody? Or did you sort of
Um,
pick and choose based on what they, well, for example, there's City Owl Press in New York, I think. They deal with primarily fantasy romance and those types of supernatural romances, things like that. Haverhill House Publishing down in Massachusetts, primarily horror thriller type thing. Were you more genre specific in who you approached, or did you just kind of send out to?
no, I definitely did my research and tried to find a good fit. Like if I was sending to agents, I definitely looked at like comparative titles. You know, I learned so many great things in grad school, you know, about how to approach these, and I was so lucky to have so many great mentors. And so one thing I did all the time was like, if I read a book I loved, I would see who the agent was in the author's acknowledgments, you know? And so if it's in my genre, if I thought it was a comparative title, oh, you know, that agent publishes or takes on work that is similar to mine, you know, so I might send there. And then the same thing with small presses, you know, because I read widely like most writers. So I'd say, oh, my book might be a good fit at this small press. And then, of course, I have so many wonderful writers in my life who publish at different places. And so I learn from them too, you know, where are they publishing their work? And is my work anything like theirs in genre or content? Yeah.
So,
I believe in doing your research when it comes to that. 'Cause otherwise, like, you might just be wasting your time, you know?
so why did you decide to go with Vine Leaves Press? From what I read, they're in Melbourne, Australia. Are they
Yeah.
the only ones that picked it up, or did you get to choose from a few others? If so, why did you go with them?
They're definitely the only ones who like really definitively picked it up, but it's not the reason I went with them. Like I was really familiar with their books and their covers too. Jessica Bell, who owns the press, does like amazing. She does all the artwork for the covers. But actually, 2 authors from my MFA program published their books with Vine Leaves a few years back. So that's when I first heard of Vine Leaves, and I'd read those 2 books and I loved their books. And then I started reading other Vine Leaves titles. And I loved what they published, and they're definitely willing to kind of take risks on work that might not fit super neatly into the commercial mainstream, which I love. And they've been amazing. They've been great to work with. Yeah.
Speaking of covers, that was the next thing. Is the cover is amazing. It's beautiful. I don't think seeing it here does it justice, but definitely those who have ordered it will love it. How did you choose? Did you have any say, any influence on how it was designed, or?
So I had no idea really what the cover was going to be. I mean, they did ask me, can you make a list of like recurring images throughout the book? And what do you envision your cover to look like? So they give you some say, but to be honest with you, I am so unartistic when it comes to anything visual. Like writing's the only thing I can do. I can't, do anything musically or visual art. So I love their covers, and Jessica Bell, like I said, does such an amazing job. And she's also a musician and a writer and all these other things. So I was kind of like, I don't know what I want. I don't know how I envision it looking, I want to see what they come up with. So I did my best to give her some thoughts, and this was the first and only cover. She emailed me and was like, what do you think? And I loved it. So it's really, I felt really lucky in that regard that I just loved the first thing she showed me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely, you really want to make sure that you have a good cover that just pops, and it does. Um, so you mentioned other projects. What other projects do you have going on?
Yeah, so currently I'm working on two collections of linked short stories, or AKA novels and stories. So one of them, I was in the restaurant business for a lot of years, and even, filling in part-time, even just prior to COVID. And so one of the collections is a collection of restaurant stories. It has it revolves around one particular fictional restaurant. And it has all these recurring themes and characters the way linked story collections do. So each story is meant to be self-contained, and some of them have been published on their own. But the whole book tells a larger story, as a book length work. So one thing I explore a lot in that collection is the way, the restaurant industry is just so interesting. And I think when I wasn't doing it full time or most of the time anymore is kind of when those stories started like just pouring out of me. The way that, when you're so immersed in something, it's so hard to write about it, right? I was at work working in restaurants. I'm like, I don't want to write about this. I'm doing this all the time. And then once I was away from it and gained some perspective and some distance, there's just so much material there and so many interesting characters. And one thing I explore a lot in that collection is, one, the way we form surrogate families, in these specific like job environments. And of course, in restaurants, you have like, it's a lovely setting in a way for a writer because your senses are everywhere, right? There's food everywhere. So like smell, taste, sight, it's loud, so there's so much you can do with the sensory detail, which is really fun. But also the collection really explores class issues in our society, which I think are so like just enormously important and not talked about enough. This idea of like people that work really hard that are sometimes on the periphery, in a way, like maybe have no health insurance or, no retirement or, so I like to explore that a bit too in that one. And then the other one is completely different.
So working in the restaurants, did you ever eavesdrop on some of the conversations that people were having and use
Always.
those in your stories?
Always. Yeah. Yeah. Everything. I mean, not even just, I mean, I think that's true for all writers. Even little details that like some of my coworkers would tell me about, like my dad does this. So that could be in any industry, right? Where you learn about some character who does this quirky thing. And yeah, then you use it in a story. But restaurants, I mean, every day is different. There's always different characters. You hear a lot. You have like those
Yeah.
bartender ears, and you have to really understand character in the same way you have to when you write.
Yeah, yeah. Believe me, I know my wife was in the industry for quite a long time out in San Diego. Started off as a waitress full time, and became a hostess. Then we moved back here, and who knows, opened up down the street, and she was a hostess there for from when it opened to when it closed. So
Yeah.
yeah, she comes up with quite the stories sometimes of frustrating stories sometimes of customers and
Yeah, you need a thick
stuff. But
skin, just like being a writer.
yep, yep. So do you ever think of taking this story here and your memoir and turning it into something fiction?
No, I think I'm done with this material. Like, I spent a lot of time with it. I think I'm kind of
Mhm.
just ready to put it into the world and to release it. And no, I don't think so. I mean, I think sometimes I write things and there might be like a similar theme, or like you said, this book has a lot of addiction in it. Then I might have like a fictional story I'm writing, and maybe there is somebody who is struggling with addiction, but it's not necessarily based on anything from my like life up close and personal. It's more just um like everything, we pick up things from our lives and it ends up in our writing, even if we've only ever written fiction.
So in your workshops for those who are survivors of sexual assault, did you ever use any of your examples in your books, or did you talk about things in your books if similar situations from the women you work with came up?
No, I really didn't. I mean, that was meant to be such a place that was like for those specific women and focused on them and centered on them. So that's really how I focused everything, and I tried to do it in a cumulative fashion. So, one week we're dealing with this and this thing comes up, and I tried to maintain flexibility and be like, well, next week we're going to build off what we worked on this week, which was really unpredictable in that setting, because you've got, I mean, it was a small group, but you've still got people dealing with like insanely different experiences, like really dramatically different experiences. You have to try and work with that as best you can. So I didn't bring my own anything other than like my love of writing and teaching into
Right,
it.
right. So what is your hope for this book, and what will it give to you hope it gives to your readers?
I mean, I think all literature in a sense can make us feel less alone, right, in the world, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, poetry.
Mhm.
And I think, I mean, that's absolutely what I hope this book does for people. I hope it gives them hope. I hope it makes them feel less alone. I hope it makes them believe in perseverance and in the power of art and writing, and that there can be like healthy ways to channel things we're dealing with. So yeah, that's what I hope. I know there is darker subject matter, but my my wish is that people walk away feeling like it's a hopeful story.
Hmm. Hmm. So you teach writing at SNHU, creative writing classes here in Dover. You do private tutoring for writing. Do you think that writing this book and what you've learned from writing this book has helped you in your ability to teach others?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I don't currently teach. I currently have a day job that's different, but it is writing related. But I absolutely think writing this book played into my teaching, and I do still work one-on-one with writing clients and do like creative writing coaching. So I do that, but I don't do the scheduled classes just because of flexibility. But yeah, I mean, everything I learned in grad school, everything I learned through my own process, I always try and share with my students, because I feel like that's what my mentors have done for me. And it's been hugely helpful, is just to kind of be honest about the craft, to be honest about the business. and to just be as helpful as you can and as good of a resource as you can for your students. Absolutely.
Now, this is kind of a fun question I kind of like to ask everybody towards the end. Would you like to see this as a film, as a movie, as a TV special, or as not even as a fictional movie, or I don't want to say a Hallmark movie, but uh, would you like to see it in portrayed in real life?
I mean, I think every writer wants to see their book as a film, right? But yeah, I mean, my mom and I kind of joke about who her character is going to be.
Well,
Yeah.
that's the next part of the question is if let's say somebody comes to you and says, hey, I'd like to do a 2-hour TV movie on this. What characters would you like to see play different people?
Well, I think for my mom, we came up with Jamie Lee Curtis.
Okay. Okay.
They have a similar hairdo. That's about as far as we got. That's such a tough question, especially with a memoir, I don't really know. When I was a kid, I was obsessed with Alyssa Milano, so maybe she could be in there somewhere.
Now, if they said that they wanted to, well, how much hands-on would you want to have in the screenplay?
I think I'm done with the material. I think I'd be okay. I mean, I think that, my understanding is you kind of give up those rights.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not always. I don't know enough about it. This is my first book. I do not have a movie. So I think I'd be okay with kind of letting it go off into the sunset.
And what if they wanted to make it more of a linear timeline than individual things? Would you be okay with that, or would you want them to kind of stick more towards the way you set up the book?
I think film is so different that I would probably have to trust the screenwriters and the filmmakers, because I think they know way more about screenwriting than I do. Yeah.
Rick says Sarah Silverman as the adult Gina. Yeah, I can see that. I can see that. So any thoughts of doing an audiobook?
I have thought about that a little bit, and I'm kind of just still researching that. My contract didn't include audio rights, so I can do that if I want to. So I don't know. I'm kind of still looking into that. I mean, I think it's a great idea. I know tons of people who listen to books far more than they read books because, well, I think pre-COVID, it was a lot of people commuting, right? But even post-COVID, people are just so busy. And I think people can listen to them while they clean their house and they do all these different tasks. So I do think it's a great idea.
Well, here's my shameless plug for the evening. We partner with a company called Libro.fm. It's an audiobook company that supports local bookstores. Portions of sales through our or the bookstore that you choose link to them, they get a portion of the sales. And they're wonderful people to work with. They're very responsive. Their app is fantastic. I listen to stuff when nobody's in the store, and I'm doing, and then that's how we get books for the store, and to see what we can, because it would take me 300-400 page book would take me months with all the time that I don't have to read it, when I can just do it in 9-10 hours when I'm not busy.
Exactly. Yeah,
So
that's a great example.
So something to look into instead of the other choice that's out there.
Yeah.
Libro FM, that who shall not be named. So if you decide to go audiobook, would you want to read it yourself, or would you want to have a professional person narrator narrate
I'd
it?
want to have a professional person do that. I've heard a lot of authors say they try and do it by themselves, but I'm not an actress by any means, and that's a huge time investment, and it's just not my skill set, so.
Yeah, we have one author, a good friend of the stores, and she did. It's a young adult dragon magic sort of a fantasy book, but she did, not only did she directed, produced it, and everything herself, her voices, but she used different voices for all the characters, And
Wow.
yeah, so I kept following her on her progress of it, and she says she won't do it for the next. Well, she's got 4 more books now in the series, and she won't do that again. So it
Yeah.
is. It's time consuming. It's a lot of work and
And
frustration
you
stuff.
need
But
the equipment too.
yep,
Yeah.
yep. But she did a great job on it. Um, but it is. So, would you want a single person to read it, or would you want one or two people to do different parts? Or because I've read some where just one person does a great job, two people, one does a male part, one does the female part,
Hmm.
works. And then there's a bunch of people doing all the different characters, which can be just too much and too confusing. What would you?
Yeah, I've never really thought about it. I mean, I think one narrator. I mean, I read books much more than I listen to books, but any of the audiobooks I've listened to have the one narrator, and even if they're speaking the different lines of dialogue from different characters, I've never felt that troublesome or jarring or confusing. So I think the one narrative voice would be fine. Yeah.
What do you like better? Do you like sort of an accent, or the American?
um I guess the American, because that's what I'm used to. Yeah.
There's some great books with male or female narrators who have an English accent or even an Irish accent, um, who just adds that little bit extra to the book. Um, but there's some great. Who would you, if you could pick any voice actor, actress, whoever, to narrate it? Who would it be? Jamie Lee Curtis?
Maybe. I don't really know. I don't know. I'm not familiar with enough voice actors, I think, to answer that properly. Maybe other people have suggestions though, who have read some of it.
So, what are some of the other journals and anthologies that are out there that people can get that have some of your work in it?
So yeah, most of this book has been published in different journals and anthologies. So the Gettysburg Review, some of this work is in the, I'm cheating and I'm looking in here. Fugue Literary Journal, Under the Sun, Flyway. They're actually all listed on my website. Like, I do have a tab with my shorter publications. So I have a list of all the journals where I've been published, no matter what the genre. And then if it is an electronic publication, I allow, I don't mean it like that, but people can just click on it and read them if they're electronic publications rather than having to order the print journal.
Now, on that page, I'm on your website right now. On that publications page, is that you at the bottom?
Yes.
There's a picture.
I
What's
know,
the
it's a
book you're
funny
reading?
picture. It's
What's
actually a picture that an editor of Pembroke magazine, where I published a piece, he wanted everybody to be reading that issue of the journal for his social media. And so it was just like a fun picture,
Yeah,
literary kind of picture.
it looks like you were having a good time.
Yeah.
So if anybody is looking for the website, it's gina-troisi.com. Um, and it has books, news, interviews, publications, events, all that kind of good stuff, reviews of her book. Definitely read the reviews, they're fantastic. So we're pretty much to the end here. If anybody has any other questions, now's the time to or comments. There are a lot of comments congratulating you on this. Again, I congratulate you on this. It must be pretty exciting to have your baby out there, finally, after all this time.
Thank you.
Yeah, lots of congratulations, lots of good jobs. So powerful to hear your journey and the evolution of your book. Congratulations, so inspired by your courage and honesty. It's definitely an honest book. Like you said, you did leave some things out, which of course we won't know about, but the stuff you did leave in, that does take a lot of courage to put that in there. So The Angle of Flickering Light, available, of course, at our store, Freethinkers Corner, in Dover, New Hampshire, and freethinkerscorner.com. You can get it there for pickup, or we can ship it to you. Bookshop.org is another company that a lot of bookstores, including us, partner with, that the book is also available through there. They support local bookstores. If you're not in our area or you want to support your local bookstore, just go to your local bookstore and ask them for it. A lot will go and special order for you. And of course, you can definitely get it on through Gina's website. And any last words?
No, just thank you everyone so much for coming, and thank you so much, Chris, for hosting this.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Yeah.
It was my pleasure. Again, it was a great book. Thank you everybody for joining us, and for all of you who have gotten the books. Some that are being shipped should be on the way. Those who can pick it up can start picking them up as of tomorrow. Signed copies while they last, but you live right across the border, so
Yeah.
it'll be quick to get more if I need to. So again, thank you very much. Good luck with the book. We'll have you in store as soon as we can. We're going to have our first live event, in-person event in May. We'll see how that goes, and then hopefully we'll be able to grow from there. Stay safe, stay sane.
Thank you. You too. Thanks everyone for coming. I really appreciate it.